Marcy started with this amazing list of what is land and all the things that are land. And I would like to just add to that list because I don't think it's actually possible to put a cap on the number of things that land can be. So one of the emerging conversations in planning in Canada today is the question of political authority over land. Who owns the land? Who makes decisions about the land? How are these decisions and how are these questions shaped by the past 500 years of settler colonialism and emerging capitalism? And so conversations about the land are so important because they're so foundational to these kinds of things, these kinds of debates, as well as to the challenges that we face today, including, of course, climate change. So I'm really excited this morning to welcome Brett Huson here as a speaker. Get, also known as Brett Huson, is from the Gitxsan Nation of the Northwest interior of British Columbia. Influenced by this matrilineal society, Brett developed a passion for his people's culture, land, and politics, and a desire to share their knowledge and stories. He has worked in the film and television industry for over 16 years and is the volunteer chair for the Sakiwe Music Festival here in Treaty 1. He's also a member of the Science Committee for Adaptation Futures 2023, and the multi-award-winning Mothers of the Sun is Brett's first series of books, and he is currently writing new books in both fiction and nonfiction that explore the worlds of the Gitxsan culture and perspective. With the support of his wife Jerry and their children Warren and Ruby, Brett endeavors to continue sharing the stories from the land and creating dialogue and understanding around Indigenous pedagogies and ways of knowing. Brett is also working with the Prairie Climate Center at the University of Winnipeg to connect science and Indigenous knowledges, and this work has led to the launch of the Indigenous Knowledge section of the Climate Atlas. So welcome, Brett.
Amahiluch. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? All right. Simgiget signum hanach gansko bewilsuch hetum sket wa e lach sintich wirkel huchsui wirp gut genuch will so itwi. So that introduction just means honorable men, honorable women, and all of the others of honorable birth. My name is Hetchum's Get, which means to stand like a man. And I come from the Gitxsan Nation. My house group is the White Owl, and my clan is the Fireweed. And I come from Lac Sintich, which is the Caribou Ravine territory in the northwest interior of what settlers now call British Columbia. I've been living in Winnipeg now for almost 18 years. My wife is from Winnipeg, so that's why I've been here for so long. And I really appreciate all of you lending me your eyes and your ears today. It's an honor to be able to share and just a little bit of what I know. I don't know much, but I try to impart what I do know to all of those who will listen to try to see if we can maybe change perspective in the world that we're living in now. So this narrative wasn't necessarily the goal of artists the world over, but became the outcome. The development of urban spaces has typically been guided by the idea of what can the powers that be do to make life benefit their wants. So we are now in an era where adaptation is necessary, and the arts, guided by an Indigenous lens, may provide this path to resiliency. So in my culture, it was the artists, the people who did the designing within our nation, who helped build our nation. The ones who designed what our buildings were going to look like, because we had many different structures. Typically on the West Coast, in museums, our understanding of what West Coast buildings were has been relegated to a longhouse, but those are just remnants of what our people used to be prior to colonization. So to kind of get to that pathway, we have to kind of understand the human bubble, this urban disconnect that has happened. People have segregated themselves from the earth, so much so that they believe everything is going to be provided for them through policy, through governance, and through industrial processes. We have forgotten all of the things that actually govern the world, that actually make the world operate, that give us clean water and air. No amount of human intervention and human policy are ever going to give us any of those things. So when you are looking at understanding what the human bubble is, then you must start to understand everything that operates within our world. So what system will we be designing for? Are we designing for a forest, a grassland, tundra, or desert ecosystem? Is it near freshwater or a marine ecosystem? Do we know what the food chain is? And do we have an understanding of the food web? So what do these things mean for the work that you do? Well, you have to kind of take a look at, again, like I said, what makes the world work. A lot of times you're going to be working in places where you design structures that you're going to, or places that you're going to have to constantly look at the risks. You're going to have to try to mitigate and manage those risks. You're going to give lifespans to projects. And all of these things, you need to start to really take into account how the land behaves around these urban centers. Because the more and more that we are impacted by this man-made climate change that we're experiencing right now, the faster things will change. I recently heard from one of my colleagues who's a practitioner, an architect, who said they kind of wondered what is their future going to be in design. Is it going to be relevant still? But yeah, I believe all of it still is relevant. It's the artists who really do change the world. So to kind of look at the perspective that I'm coming from, all life has energy. As a Gitxsan individual, I was born into a matrilineal lineage. This was accompanied by my Guaxlie'inst, which is all my inheritance. This inheritance also means that we are stewards of wherever we call home. As we grow, our Guaxlie'inst is shown to us through our Yushlamach, which is our pedagogical process. We are primarily attached to the truth that all life is interconnected. A deep understanding of our ecosystems ultimately governs our epistemology. So everything that we are as Gitxsan people is from the land. My language, the way that I see the world, the way that I connect with another human, that is governed by the land that I come from. And Guaxlie'inst is ever present. Guaxlie'inst is omnipresent, in fact. The things that you inherit in your life as you are born as a human are always there, no matter how much you try to live as what we look at as human beings right now. So your Guaxlie'inst should even shape how you create. The things that you make in your life should be shaped by your Guaxlie'inst, all that you inherit. So all of what that you inherit is both the land that you were born into and also the responsibilities that go with that land. And you have to really take this into account, especially if you're looking at clients. You're going to be working with clients, you're going to be working for people. You have to kind of start to learn and put yourself in their perspective as well, because this is going to be part of their Guaxlie'inst. This is what working with people is like. So everyone has their own types of processes, but I want to give a little bit of an example of kind of how I translated a Gitxsan process into this type of work. So let's just say you have a very compelling idea. When we have compelling ideas, I go to my father clan because they're outside of my house group, because like I said, we're matrilineal. So everything that I inherit, my name, my real name, my clan, and everything come from my mom. So when I have an idea and I want to share it with somebody who I can trust, but they're outside of my house group, so they're looking at it from a different perspective, I go to my father clan. So in this case, you'd be going to your trusted peer who is outside of wherever you are working. Someone that you can trust, that you can present these ideas to. And then you want to start to connect with the knowledge carriers. And, ideally, you want to try to connect with the people who come from the land itself. That could be Indigenous people, but it also be local knowledge experts, the local people who are experts on the land itself, the ones who are living there right now. Really connect with them and try to learn about, what they understand of the ecosystem, what they understand of the world around them. And, when you go into urban centers, typically municipalities are kind of governed by all these different policies, but somewhere in there you're going to find someone who kind of is looking at the bigger picture. And we don't want to silo everything into these certain businesses and everything compartmentalized, separated from one another, because that's not how life works. So this is what Connecting with Knowledge Keepers will help you kind of look at and kind of give you a different perspective of where you're designing for. So then you're going to learn with the location in mind. So you're going to learn about the place that you're in, and you're going to start to take in as much information as you can from that place that you're working in. And it's all about relationality, so it's all about the relationships that we create. So you want to start to build relationships with Indigenous communities, experts and local experts. Then you want to learn about the ecosystems, the climate, the food chains, and the food webs. Again, these different things are impacting everything in urban centers, but people forget that. So your design should reflect the local ecology, the communities. Your design should reflect the function of the land. So then you want to go back to engaging the people, bring these ideas back to the people, your stakeholders, your shareholders, all the people that you've talked to and gotten advice from. You start to bring this back to them, and this continued connection is fostering better relationships. And then once you get to an end of a project, you're finalizing your project, this is kind of a concept that I like to share with people. There's always a small portion left undone, and this is to remind us of the work for future generations. So you don't literally have to leave a part of your project undone. It could be more of a philosophical take. However, in our society, we actually left small little portions of something undone. When we do a button blanket that the chiefs wear, there's always a tiny corner or a button that's missing, and they do that on purpose. That's to remember that you are not a ruler, you're not the final end-all and be-all of your people. You are simply there to support, and you're a step. And it's to remember that there are future generations ahead of you who need to continue this work. So when you start to look at your designs, you have to remember that they're going to outlive you, potentially, ideally. But to remember that there are others who can contribute to this. So you always want to try to future-proof those concepts. So there's a deep spirituality that we have connected to everything that we do. Respect is a key factor of spirituality. Connection to the land, belonging to your community, and a balance with the ecosystems. That's what part of spirituality is. And equity through understanding that we are all simply a part of this world. So spiritual connections was less about religion, and it's more about the deep-seated understanding of how energy works in this world. Energy cannot be destroyed, it simply moves from place to place. We look at inanimate objects as having energy. This is the perspective that Indigenous people have always carried, but now you see it translated into different words, into Western science and different concepts. But we have thought about this philosophy. We look at this philosophy. If you look at the West Coast where I'm from, you see the artwork, the form line artwork, very specific shapes. This is what we believe to be the building blocks of life. So every aspect of our life we drew in these shapes because we believe those were part of the spirit that built people, built inanimate things that all had energy. And the reason we typically use a lot of black and red was because every time we would do controlled burns, we would see that the whole world after it was burnt was black. This is a rudimentary understanding of carbon-based life forms. We didn't know it was carbon, but we had a rudimentary understanding of what we thought made life. So we have a lot of this concept within our societies. And every nation carries different stories. That's just mine. I can speak to mine. I can't speak for other nations here. I can only speak to what I know. And there are many different nations. The government likes to relegate us to the terms First Nations, Indigenous, whatever. I'm Gitxsan. That's my nation. To say First Nations or Indigenous is just the same as European or Chinese. It doesn't mean anything unless you know the people. So that's the terminology that you have to remember. The government likes to lump us in together in those points, but that's not what we are. So ever present in the work we do needs to be the connection to Indigenous knowledges. Building that trust with the community. Do not tokenize or oversimplify what Indigenous knowledges are. And visualize what you learn. Try to take those ideas that you learn from people and create an idea board or create a space where you can remember those concepts and try to visualize them in your own way. And this is going to help remind you. You know, we used our artwork to visualize our stories and our concepts and belief in the world to remind us always our place in the world. And then relationship building is ever present. Continued fostering to build connections so that you can grow the trust between your connections. And relationships, they should not end with projects. You want to continue these relationships on because you never know where they're going to impact you in the future, who might help you in the future for different projects or anything in your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be what you're working on. So how are we going to get there? Well, one of the things that I would recommend is envisioning your metaphorical or even your literal home fire. Create a space where all stakeholders feel safe in sharing. Establish protocols that govern these new relationships you build. So when I'm talking about a home fire, in our way, we have a fire where our homes are. I don't put garbage in this fire. I don't throw paper, anything. That's a fire that's for my home. We can cook over this fire. We can meet around this fire. We can share around this fire. We even share the most deepest and darkest things with one another at some certain points. That fire is ceremony. And fire is ceremony because it is the basic and most beginning element of life. All of the universe is governed by this energy. So it's good to take this philosophy into everything that you do. Inclusiveness. Pursue continued engagement and communication throughout the process. Again, it's going to be repetitive. You want to continue building those relationships so you continue the engagement from the beginning to the end. And although you're creating the design, allow stakeholders the glimpse of your projects over certain predetermined time periods. This is allowing them to feel like a part of the project. You don't have to go out there and show it to everyone, just the people that you're working closely with. Even if you don't think it's done, sometimes it's just good to show them where you're at and remind them what you're working on. And sometimes they can offer a little bit of feedback to ground you and kind of pull you back in, because sometimes we get lost in our work. And I do a lot of writing, and I get lost in my writing sometimes. So I have to go to those close people that I've connected with, a lot of my colleagues and friends. Sometimes they aren't even writers. They're just people that I know are creative, and I like to connect with them. And in partnerships, working with Indigenous partners is better than hiring an Indigenous person who doesn't participate in the projects. I've encountered this with so many damn firms, it disgusts me. I see an Indigenous person, and this was in film, this was in architecture, this is in all different facets of projects. Someone will hire an Indigenous person, then apply for Indigenous money, and then this person sits in a tiny office in the back and doesn't participate in any of the projects. I've seen this too many times. Do not do this in your practice. Do not do this in your life. It is disgusting. And I'll be firm with that because that is too much. I see it too much. It's something I'm very passionate about. And I hate seeing people sitting in a back office somewhere not participating. So don't tokenize Indigenous firms, businesses, or organizations. Don't utilize them just to put yourself up on a platform. Create genuine connections. Work with the people. Show that you are willing to build a long-term relationship. Because this is the thing that creates divisiveness among communities, is tokenization of our people. So, in summary, we are in an era where adaptation is necessary. Will you continue believing in the current human condition, Or will you inspire the world through new design that is greater than any building? Exploring many perspectives presents solutions and inspirations unseen to the narrowed worldview. So what I want to impart to you is to try to look at different perspectives. Look at the world in a different view than your own. People with different life experiences bring different perspectives. So you have a better understanding of what challenges you might have in the future. These are things that are really important in relationship development. And I really hope that all of you kind of take that to heart, to not be afraid to connect with other people who are unlike yourself, not just Indigenous communities, but anyone. You go to communities where there are people who are experts in their local area and their local knowledges, try to connect with them. Connect with people who will enlighten your work, enlighten yourself, and make you better. Don't worry about being on platforms and pedestals. That doesn't get society anywhere. When you honor one person, it doesn't do anything. But when you work together and honor each other every day, that's better than honoring singular people. That's just the perspective that we have as Gitxsan people. So thank you so much for giving me some of your time and your ears. I truly appreciate, and I'm honored to share a little bit that I know with you. There's my email and there's my website. Feel free to connect with me there. All my social media is posted on the website as well. I don't know if we were going to do any Q&A at all, but
Yeah. Would you be willing to
yeah,
have a conversation?
I'm open to questions if anybody has any questions.
Great.
Hi, Brett. We've met a few times in the poetry land.
Yeah.
And here as well. I just wonder if you could just tell us some more about some specific projects that you've been involved in. Just a bit more detail.
Yeah, sure. So currently, my projects are kind of all over the place. I work with the Prairie Climate Center, so I'm a research associate there. My focus is on connecting Indigenous sciences to Western science. So changing the perspective on what Indigenous knowledges are. So as an example, I write a series of books for young people, as you heard, called Mothers of Huson. And I was asked by a youth magazine some time ago called Red Rising Magazine to write an article about water. So I wrote the Sockeye Mother. And one of the reasons that I did this was to show people what our knowledges were with regards to the salmon. And so in the past, we tried to tell government that commercial fishing wasn't good. We tried to tell them the impacts that the salmon had on the ecosystem. And it wasn't until sometimes in the late 90s, early 2000s that they finally actually discovered that salmon fed the world, which is something we've been telling them for a long time. So when they started to look at those concepts to research, they were getting that from Indigenous people, but they were never crediting us for any of that work. So what I wanted to do was to show the world what our knowledges are. So a lot of my work is focused on that. So at the Prairie Climate Center, we have the Climate Atlas of Canada, which many of you probably are aware of or have used at some point. I helped them create the Indigenous Knowledges section of that site. And that was a way for us to not only share the story of climate change from Indigenous communities, but also just to make it more accessible to everyone. And a lot of what we do is focusing on telling the story of climate change in a way that everyone can understand, not just researchers. Because normally climate change is looked at as a lot of hard data, because climate is different than weather. Climate is your average temperature over time. It's not a weather event, which a lot of people associate. So someone will say, oh, well, it got really hot this year, or it's got really cold. That doesn't look like climate change to me. So there's a lot of misconception on what that is. So we try to communicate things better that way. So that's one of the things that I do. Along with that, currently I'm working on an infrastructure project with Infrastructure Canada to develop a tool that will help take Indigenous knowledges and help it kind of bring it into the risk assessment world for engineers and whoever is working in Indigenous communities. And Indigenous communities can use this to better assess the risk to their cultural infrastructure. So things that we've always been doing for thousands of years, like such as clam beds on the coast or fishing sites, different things that we use regularly. So I'm working on that. I'm also writing a book on adaptation and indigenous knowledges with a colleague from UVic. So there's a lot of things that I'm working on right now. I'm kind of pulled in many different directions, and I also sit on, like was mentioned before, the Science Committee for Adaptation Futures, which this year is going to be in Montreal in October. I really recommend anyone here to kind of, if you can, attend the conference. This Adaptation Futures is part of the United Nations World Adaptation Program, and I'm the only non-PhD sitting on the committee, and I'm an Indigenous person. So it was kind of unique that I was invited, but they look at me as an equal with regards to the knowledge that I share, which is very different than the way Canadians look at me. Canadians look at me as someone without a degree because they're looking at this Western system of gatekeeping, where if you have a degree, you're higher up of some sort. It's a weird hierarchical process, which is very patriarchal. But internationally, the systems are starting to change. So they're just looking at knowledges in general. So they brought me into the fold, and I was very honored to be. I'm very honored to be a part of that. So that conference will be in Montreal in October, the beginning of October. It's adaptationfutures.com for those who want to attend. It's an amazing conference. One of my colleagues was at the last one. And this is the first time it's going to be held in Canada. So I definitely recommend, if you can, try to make it there, because it kind of covers a wide range of knowledge systems. So it's not just climate researchers. There's going to be policymakers there, designers. Everyone's going to be at this conference. So it's kind of a unique opportunity to. I've ensured that this year the main theme is Indigenous knowledges. So key theme number one is Indigenous knowledges, and that's never been done before in an international adaptation conference. So I'm pretty happy about that, and I'm hoping that we have a lot of presenters there, and it'll be. I'm hoping it'll be amazing. Did anyone else have any other questions? And don't be shy if you have anything. If you want to come see me after, usually I get a lot of people afterwards because they're too shy to ask in person in front of people. But I always say, don't be shy about your question. It's not going to offend me. I've had much worse things said to me regularly, so questions don't offend me. Yep.
In a room full of people with PhDs and CETs and all these abbreviations, and we're talking about the token Indigenous firms and Indigenous people, how do you overcome those types of challenges when people want to look at your credibility?
I welcome the challenge. I've had many people ask me regularly if I've been published or what I'm talking about is published. They want examples. I had someone from some organization. I'm not going to name names because I still work with these people. This person from this one organization challenged me. He asked me, because I was telling him that we need to start looking at climate action, not just waiting for policymakers. We need to start looking at change that we can do now. And he said, well, do you have an example of Indigenous climate action? I said, do you have time? I said, there are probably thousands of examples right now. I said, have you heard of the Wet'suwet'en? The Wet'suwet'en are our allies. They're actually right on our territory. They were part of our Delgamuukw decision in the 90s. And I said, that is climate action. I said, we're not going there with weapons. We're not going there trying to hurt anyone. We're just trying to protect the salmon. We're trying to protect the ecosystems. The salmon is literally the only reason that there is a temperate rainforest on the coast. That is the only reason. They provide 70% of the marine-derived nitrogen that land needs. So these are the things that I get challenged with all the time, that people want to challenge my knowledge, but I just keep speaking my truth. I keep speaking the truth that I know. It's led me to many different outcomes. Actually, another thing that I'll be doing this year is I'm writing an article with the Canadian Geographic. It'll be coming out in October as well. And I'm going to be talking about the glaciation, the last glacial maximum, and how it's connected to our stories about the spirit bear, what people call the spirit bear. And it's going to focus on talking about why we have the stories of the spirit bear. So the spirit bear, for those who don't know, is a black bear that has a genetic anomaly only to our coast. It's a bear that is white. but it's actually a black bear. It's not an albino. And in our stories, we say the raven left one of every 10 black bears white to remind us of the last time that our land was pristine before the ice took over the land. Because we've been here far longer than the last glacial maximum. We have cities that are over 20,000 years old. So the concept of the land ice bridge, again, is a patriarchal concept meant to place us in a very short period of time here. We're far older than that, and they're starting to find those cities now. There's a city that was found on the coast of British Columbia that's 14,000 years old. There are many more that are older than that. And we'll start to find out more of those now that we're able to speak about ourselves properly. So that's kind of, again, how I kind of cope with people who are coming at me with their degrees. It's kind of like waving a piece of paper up, but it doesn't change who I am. It doesn't make me crumble and hide for no reason. I am not afraid of a paper. I'm not afraid of someone's degree, but when they come at me with respect, then that merits respect. So it's not to say that education isn't important, it very much is important. Again, we have our own processes of education. Education is still relevant. It's just this hierarchical gatekeeping of patriarchy. That is not a good process to keep. Because you could be losing so many brilliant people just because they don't hold up to your standards. So that's kind of where our processes go with regards to education. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. I just have a quick question about, well, before your presentation, we were talking about your work with Climate Atlas and how you worked on developing like futures of Manitoba, say, for example, and projected futures in terms of climate change and seeing areas that are prone to flooding and other climate disasters. And then I know there is also a new section of Climate Atlas, which includes Indigenous knowledges, mapping Indigenous groups across the country. So how do you see that connecting to the discussions that you're talking about? And how can students look at that and then have discussions about climate change adaptation in the future?
So just looking at the Climate Atlas that we provide at work, this is a great tool to be able to take climate change and look at it in the perspective that everyone can understand. So there's hard data there for the data geeks. So those who still want the data, it's there. You can download it and you can look at all of that information. It is a ton. So much, I think it takes up petabytes of storage. And these are models that are calculated from around the globe. Then we have people in UVic. I think it was UVic. Anyway, there's someone that we work with who puts those into the models, the global models, and then we put those onto the map. So this map you can actually access to be able to take a look at what climate is going to be projected in wherever you're working or wherever you are. And it tells you what it might be in the future. So it's a projection. It'll give you the low carbon scenario and the high carbon scenario. And within that, we are also developing what is called the analogs page. And this is going to be kind of a little more relevant for people because it's going to help visualize what the future climate will look like. So for instance, in Winnipeg, and I think we only have the Prairie region up right now, but we're working on the national analogs. So in the Prairie region, you can look at Winnipeg and see that by 2050 in the near future, it's going to be a climate that is very similar to Grand Forks. So it's going to start to change very, very visibly and physically. And this helps visualize that. And where this is going to be important is you're going to be able to look, what is the infrastructure, what are the green spaces, what are the types of things that are done in those municipalities, because that's going to be more relevant to us up here. So that's what the analogs page is going to provide for you, is to be able to look at what you should be planning for and designing for. So in Vancouver, up until the 30s, people were able to fish for their own salmon out of the tributaries right in the city. And then because design started to take over and they weren't taking into account the land around them, the salmon disappeared. And then so recently, city planners and also local people started to clean out these tributaries, and they started to rebuild around it in a way that allowed the tributaries to return. And then was about a decade ago, the salmon started to return after like 50 years. They hadn't been there 50 to 80 years. And so the salmon are starting to run through the tributaries again. So again, this is an example of kind of implementing plans for the land itself. And looking at in the future, what you can find on the Climate Atlas is going to allow you to kind of think about that. Wherever you're designing for, start to think about what the future holds for this location. So that's kind of where the Climate Atlas is a very good tool. And we don't know exactly what will be there in 2050, but this gives us a good projection. Right now, we're tracking on the high carbon scenario, especially in Canada. Canada is actually behind, we're the last place out of the G20 countries with regards to reducing emissions. That's because of all the industrial projects happening.
Can you say that again?
Out of the G20 countries, we're the last with regards to emissions reduction. So I think second last or last. And you can find all this information on the IPCC report, and I believe Climate Narratives published a report as well. You can find that information. So that's the kind of stuff that I work with, that I do, and hopefully that'll kind of help everyone in the future for anything that they're working on. And yeah, if there are any other questions, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And thank you for listening to me and giving me the opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you.